The frozen wind cut through the Arizona desert like a blade, and there collapsed against the fence post of the loneliest ranch in the territory lay a child who would change everything. One starving Apache boy, 4 days, 3 women at the door, a choice that would either destroy a broken man or forge the most unlikely family the frontier had ever seen. This is that story of survival trust and the courage to love again when the world has taken everything. Stay with me until the very end and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The winter of 1882 struck Arizona territory with the fury of a vengeful spirit transforming the usually sun-baked desert into a landscape of cruel beauty. Elias Grant pulled his coat tighter as he stepped onto the porch of his cabin, the wood groaning under his boots like old bones settling. At 38, he moved with the careful deliberation of a man who had learned that sudden movements could shatter more than just the morning silence. The ranch stretched before him 200 acres of stubborn land that demanded everything and gave back just enough to keep a man breathing. Cattle dotted the frost-covered pasture like dark stones scattered by an unseen hand. He'd built this place with his own blood and sweat, alongside his wife Martha and their daughter Sarah. Now, 3 years after the fever took them both, the silence was his only companion. Elias descended the porch steps, each footfall echoing in the crisp air. The morning routine never varied: check the stock mend. What broke overnight, survive another day. It was a rhythm that kept the ghosts at bay mostly. The cattle lowed softly as he approached their breath, creating small clouds in the frigid air. He counted them by habit, 37 head, enough to keep him fed and the bank satisfied. Old Bessie, his prize breeding cow, stood apart from the others, her udder heavy with milk that would need attention soon. "Morning, girl," he murmured, running a hand along her flank. The cow turned her massive head toward him, brown eyes patient and trusting. Animals were simpler than people. They didn't ask questions about the past or make promises about the future. Elias was checking the water trough when he saw it, a dark shape pressed against the fence line about 50 yards from the cabin. At first he thought it might be a fallen branch or perhaps some debris blown by the wind, but something about the way it lay made him pause, made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He approached slowly, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt .45 at his hip. Living alone on the frontier meant trusting no one and expecting trouble from every shadow, but as he drew closer, the shape resolved into something that made his breath catch. A child. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. His small body curled against the fence post, like he was trying to become part of the wood itself. Dark hair spilled across gaunt features, and his clothes, what remained of them, were little more than tattered buckskin and threadbare cloth. Apache. The word hit Elias like a physical blow. For a moment he stood frozen, memories flooding back. Martha's scream, Sarah's cries cut short, the smoke rising from the neighboring homestead, the cavalry captain's grim face as he delivered the news that the raiders had been tracked, but too late, always too late. His hand tightened on his gun, but then the child stirred, a soft whimper escaping cracked lips, and Elias saw past the blood, past the fear, past 3 years of cultivated hatred. He saw what Martha would have seen: a dying child who needed help. "Damn," he whispered, holstering the weapon. The boy was unconscious, his breathing shallow and rapid. Elias knelt beside him, noting the way his ribs showed through torn clothing, the hollow cheeks that spoke of days without food. One small hand clutched something, a carved wooden horse worn smooth by countless touches. Elias had 2 choices. He could walk away, let nature take its course, and go back to his coffee and his silence. Or he could do something that might damn his soul or save it. He thought of Martha, of her gentle hands and fierce heart. She'd never turned away a creature in need, whether it was a wounded bird or a neighbor's hungry child. "What would you do, darling?" he whispered to the wind. The answer came not in words, but in action. Elias gathered the boy in his arms, surprised by how light he was, how fragile. The child didn't wake as he carried him toward the cabin, but his breathing seemed to steady slightly against Elias's chest. Inside, Elias laid the boy on the old sofa near the fireplace, the same spot where Sarah used to curl up with her picture books. He built up the fire until the flames danced high, then filled a pot with water and set it to warm. The child's face was a map of hardship dirt streaked with tear tracks, lips cracked from thirst, skin stretched tight over sharp bones. But beneath the suffering, Elias could see the ghost of innocence, the echo of what this boy might have been in a different world. "What's your name, son?" Elias asked softly, though he expected no answer. He fetched clean rags and began the careful work of washing away the grime and dried blood. The boy stirred once or twice, but didn't wake. Elias found himself humming an old song Martha used to sing to Sarah, something about mockingbirds and diamond rings. When the child was clean, Elias could see the full extent of his condition. He was starving, that much was clear, but there were no serious wounds, no broken bones, just the deep exhaustion of someone who had traveled far and eaten little. Elias prepared a simple broth beef stock, watered down until it was little more than flavored water. Too much, too fast would make the boy sick. He'd learned that during his own lean times, when the ranch was failing and pride was all that stood between him and starvation. "Come on now," he murmured, lifting the boy's head and touching the spoon to his lips. "Just a sip." The child's eyes fluttered open at the touch of warmth, dark eyes wide with fear and confusion. They darted around the cabin, taking in the stone fireplace, the wooden furniture, the white man kneeling beside him with a spoon of broth. "Easy," Elias said softly. "You're safe here." The boy tried to sit up to pull away, but his strength failed him. He fell back against the cushions, those dark eyes never leaving Elias's face. "I'm not going to hurt you," Elias continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "but you need to eat something or you're going to die." Understanding flickered in the child's gaze. Slowly, cautiously, he parted his lips and accepted the spoon. The broth went down easily, and soon he was taking sip after careful sip. "That's it," Elias encouraged. "Slow and steady." As the boy drank, Elias studied his face. There was intelligence there and a strength that spoke of survival against impossible odds. This child had seen things no young one should see, had endured more than most grown men. "What's your name?" Elias asked again. This time the boy spoke, his voice like rustling leaves. "Kai." "Kai," Elias repeated, tasting the unfamiliar syllables. "I'm Elias. This is my ranch." The boy's grip tightened on the wooden horse. His eyes closed, but Elias could see he was still alert, still ready to run if necessary. "Are you alone, Kai?" A slight shake of the head, hope and fear warred in the child's expression. "Family," Elias pressed gently. "Coming," Kai whispered. "Coming for me." Elias felt his blood chill. Apache raiders, perhaps, following the boy's trail. But looking at this starving child, he couldn't bring himself to believe Kai was part of any war party. More likely they were refugees displaced by the constant fighting between the army and the various tribes. "How many?" Elias asked. Kai held up 3 fingers. 3 Apache. "Coming here." Elias felt his old fears stirring, the memories of loss and rage that had sustained him through 3 years of solitude. But looking at the boy's trusting face, he made a decision that surprised him. "All right," he said quietly. "When they come, we'll face it together." Over the next hour, Elias continued feeding Kai small amounts of broth. The boy's color improved slightly, and some of the terrible hollowness left his cheeks. He spoke little, but his eyes tracked Elias's movements with growing curiosity rather than fear. "This is good," Kai said after finishing a cup of the broth. "My wife taught me to make it," Elias replied. "She said it could cure anything from a broken heart to a broken bone." "Where is she?" The question hit Elias like a physical blow. He set down the empty cup and stared into the fire. "Gone," he said finally. "She and my daughter. Fever took them." Kai nodded solemnly, as if he understood loss, in ways that went beyond his years. My mother is gone too, and my father. They sat in silence for a while, two survivors of different wars sharing the same grief. Outside, the wind continued to howl, and Elias found himself listening for sounds that didn't belong: hoofbeats, voices, the whisper of moccasins on frozen ground. "Tell me about your family," Elias said. "The ones who are coming." Kai's face softened slightly. "Naya is my aunt. She is strong like a mountain cat. Mira is her friend. She has gentle hands and makes the best pemmican. And Sari—" He paused, a ghost of a smile crossing his features. "Sari sees everything. Nothing gets past her." "Are they warriors?" "Warriors. Mothers. Survivors." Kai's voice grew stronger as he spoke of them. "They saved me when the soldiers came to our camp. We ran into the desert, but there was no food, no water. I got lost in a storm, and when I found them again—" He shrugged, the gesture heartbreaking in its resignation. Elias understood. The boy had been sent ahead, perhaps to scout for food or shelter, and had collapsed before he could return to them. Now they would be following his trail, desperate and dangerous. As if summoned by his thoughts, a new sound joined the wind, a soft thudding that might have been mistaken for falling snow if Elias hadn't spent 15 years on the frontier. Hoofbeats, multiple horses moving slowly and carefully. Kai heard it too. His eyes widened and he tried to sit up straighter. "They're here," he whispered. "Brrrt." Elias rose and moved to the window, careful to stay out of the line of sight. Through the frost-covered glass, he could see 3 figures on horseback, moving like shadows through the swirling snow. Even from a distance, he could tell they were Apache, the way they sat their horses, the careful way they approached everything about them, spoke of people who had learned to survive in a world that wanted them dead. "What do I do?" Elias asked himself as much as the boy. "Let them in," Kai said simply. "They won't hurt you if you help me." The riders had stopped about 30 yards from the cabin, just visible through the falling snow. Elias could see them conferring, their voices too low and distant to make out words. One of them, a woman he thought, pointed toward the cabin. Another raised what looked like a rifle. Elias made his choice. He walked to the door, took a deep breath, and stepped onto the porch with his hands visible and empty. "I have the boy," he called out. "He's safe." The 3 riders urged their horses closer. As they emerged from the swirling snow, Elias felt his breath catch. He'd expected warriors painted and fierce. Instead, he saw 3 women, their faces drawn with exhaustion and worry, their clothes travel-worn and patched. The one in the lead was perhaps 30 years old, with intelligent dark eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Her black hair was braided with silver ornaments that caught what little light filtered through the clouds. This had to be Naya. The second woman was older, maybe 40, with a round face and gentle eyes that reminded Elias painfully of his Martha. Her horse carried bundles that looked like herbs and healing supplies. Mira, the one who made good pemmican. The third rider stayed slightly back, her hand resting on the handle of a knife at her belt. She was younger than the others, perhaps 20, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the scene. Sari, who saw everything. "You are the one who found him?" Naya asked. Her English was accented but clear. "Yes," Elias replied. "He was near dead when I brought him in, but he's recovering." "Why?" The question came from Sari, her voice edged with suspicion. "Why help an Apache child?" Elias considered the question, aware that his answer might determine whether this encounter ended in violence or something else entirely. "Because he needed help," he said finally, "and because my wife would have haunted me forever if I'd walked away." Something shifted in Naya's expression. "Your wife, dead 3 years now, her and my daughter both." The 3 women exchanged glances. Elias could see them weighing his words, trying to determine if he was telling the truth or setting some kind of trap. "We would like to see the boy," Mira said softly. Elias nodded and stepped aside. "He's inside, weak but awake." Naya dismounted first, her movements graceful despite obvious exhaustion. The others followed, and Elias found himself facing 3 Apache women on his own porch, a situation that would have seemed impossible just hours ago. "We have weapons," Sari said bluntly. "If this is a trap—" "It's not," Elias interrupted. "But I have weapons too. Let's all agree to keep them where they are." Naya studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "Agreed." Elias led them into the cabin, acutely aware of how small the space felt with 5 people in it. Kai looked up from the sofa, his face lighting up at the sight of the 3 women. "Naya," he cried, trying to sit up. The stoic mask slipped from Naya's face as she rushed to the boy's side. She knelt beside the sofa and gathered him into her arms, speaking rapidly in Apache. Mira joined them, running gentle hands over Kai's forehead and arms, checking for injuries with the practiced touch of a healer. Sari remained standing, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the cabin. The rifle over the fireplace, the placement of windows, the kitchen knives in their wooden block. But Elias noticed that some of the tension had left her shoulders. "He's much better," Mira said, finally looking up at Elias. "What did you give him?" "Just broth. Beef stock watered down. I figured anything stronger might make him sick." Mira nodded approvingly. "You know healing." "I know hunger," Elias corrected. "Had some lean times myself." Naya spoke quietly to Kai in Apache, and the boy responded with animated gestures and glances toward Elias. Whatever he was saying seemed to surprise her. "He says you sang to him," she said finally, "while you cared for him." Elias felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Maybe a little. Old song my wife used to sing." "He has not heard singing in many weeks," Mira said softly. "None of us have." The weight of that statement settled over the cabin like snow. These were people who had lost the luxury of joy, who had been reduced to the bare necessities of survival. "Are you hungry?" Elias asked. "I don't have much, but I can make more broth. Maybe some biscuits." The 3 women exchanged another look. Elias was beginning to understand that this was their way, constant silent communication, a survival mechanism developed over months or years of being hunted. "We cannot stay," Naya said. "We must keep moving." In this weather, Elias gestured toward the window, where snow was falling more heavily. "That's a death sentence." "So is staying in one place too long," Sari said grimly. "Who's hunting you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Finally, Naya answered. "Everyone." The simple word carried a weight that made Elias's chest tight. He'd known the Apache were being driven from their lands, forced onto reservations or into hiding. But standing here with these 3 women and 1 small boy, the human cost of that policy became real in a way it never had before. "The storm's getting worse," he said. "Even if you want to leave, you won't make it far in this." As if to underscore his point, the wind howled around the cabin, rattling the windows and sending smoke back down the chimney. "One night," Mira said quietly, "just until the storm passes." Sari started to protest, but Naya raised a hand. "She's right. We cannot travel in this, and Kai needs more time to recover." "I have a barn," Elias offered. "You could sleep there if you don't trust the cabin." "We will stay inside," Naya said firmly, "but we take turns watching." It wasn't exactly trust, but it wasn't war either. Elias nodded. "Fair enough." The afternoon passed in careful politeness. Elias prepared food while the women tended to Kai and spoke quietly among themselves in Apache. He found himself stealing glances at them, noting the way Mira's hands never stopped moving, braiding grass into rope, sorting herbs, mending a tear in Sari's shirt. Survival skills, all of them. Naya watched him too, her dark eyes missing nothing. When he brought over a plate of biscuits and honey, she tested the food carefully before allowing Kai to eat. "Poison would be a coward's way," Elias said mildly. "Cowards have killed many of my people," she replied. There was no arguing with that truth. As evening fell, the storm intensified. Snow piled against the windows, and the wind howled like a living thing. Elias built up the fire and brought out extra blankets, Martha's quilts carefully preserved and rarely used. "These are beautiful," Mira said, running her fingers over the intricate stitching. "My wife made them. She had clever hands." "She was loved," Naya observed. "We can see it in how you keep this place." Elias looked around the cabin with new eyes. He'd thought he was just surviving, just maintaining, but he could see what she meant: the carefully preserved photographs, the polished furniture, the way he'd kept everything exactly as Martha would have wanted it. "Yes," he said simply. She was loved. Dinner was a quiet affair. Elias had prepared what he could: more broth for Kai, beans and salt pork for the adults' biscuits with the last of his honey. It wasn't much, but it was freely given. "This is good," Sari said, and it was the first positive thing she'd said since arriving. "Thank you," Mira added. "It has been a long time since we shared a meal at a table." "Where are you headed?" Elias asked carefully. The three women exchanged their look again. Finally, Naya spoke. "South, into Mexico, perhaps. Somewhere the army won't follow." "That's hard country, harder than here." "Hard is all we have left," she replied. After dinner, they settled into an uneasy routine. Kai curled up on the sofa, finally beginning to look like a child again rather than a refugee. Mira took the first watch, sitting by the window with a rifle across her knees. Naya and Sari spread their bedrolls near the fire. Elias retreated to his bedroom, but found sleep elusive. The presence of other people in his home was strange after so many years of solitude. But it wasn't unpleasant. For the first time in months, the silence felt filled rather than empty. He woke near midnight to the sound of quiet voices. Through his partially open door, he could see Naya and Mira speaking in low tones by the dying fire. Sari had taken over the watch, her silhouette sharp against the window. "Cannot keep running forever," Mira was saying. "Kai grows weaker each day, and winter is not half over." "Where would we go?" Naya replied. "Every place is someone else's land now." Maybe some places are kinder than others." Elias held his breath, understanding that he was overhearing a conversation that would determine the fate of 4 people. "You speak of this man," Naya said, "but he is white. They all turn on us eventually. He could have let Kai die, could have shot us when we arrived. Instead, he feeds us and offers shelter. One night of kindness does not erase a lifetime of hatred." "No," Mira agreed, "but it is a start." They fell silent, and Elias slipped back into an uneasy sleep. He dreamed of Martha, of her gentle voice, urging him toward choices he wasn't sure he was brave enough to make. Dawn came gray and cold, but the storm had passed. Elias woke to find the cabin full of the smells of cooking food. Naya was at his stove preparing what looked like some kind of grain porridge, while Mira tended to Kai and Sari kept watch. "Good morning," he said, struck by how natural the scene looked. "We used some of your supplies," Naya said without turning around. "We will repay you." "No need. How's the boy?" "Stronger. He will be able to travel today." The words hit Elias unexpectedly hard. Of course they would leave. They had to leave. This wasn't their home, and he wasn't their family. But somehow in the space of one night, the cabin had felt less empty than it had in 3 years. "The weather's clear," he said. "Should be good traveling." "Yes." They ate breakfast in relative quiet. Kai chattered a bit, his strength returning with each meal, but the adults seemed lost in their own thoughts. Elias found himself memorizing details: the way Naya held her coffee cup, the soft humming sound Mira made, while she worked the alert stillness of Sari's constant vigilance. After the meal, the women began packing their few belongings. Elias watched them with a growing sense of urgency, as if something important was slipping away. "Wait," he said suddenly. They all turned to look at him. "The boy Kai, he's not strong enough for hard travel. Another few days of rest would—" "We cannot stay longer," Sari interrupted. "Already we risk too much." "What if—" Elias stopped, shocked by what he'd been about to say. But looking at these four people, this family bound together by loss and hope, he found the courage to continue. What if you didn't have to keep running? Naya's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Stay here through the winter at least. The ranch is isolated, no one comes around for months at a time. You'd be safe. The silence that followed was deafening. Elias could see the longing in Mira's face, the cautious hope in Kai's eyes, but Naya and Sari remained skeptical. Why? Sari demanded. Why would you do this? Elias thought of Martha, of the empty cabin, and the endless silence. Because you need a place to rest, he said, and because I'm tired of being alone. The truth of it surprised him. Somewhere in the space of 18 hours, these strangers had reminded him what it felt like to have purpose beyond mere survival. You barely know us, Naya said quietly. I know you're a family. I know you're trying to protect each other. I know you've been hurt by people like me, and you have every reason not to trust. He paused, searching for the right words. But maybe we could try. Maybe we could see if different is possible. Kai spoke up from the sofa. I like it here. It's warm and safe, and he sings. The women exchanged their look one more time, but this time Elias thought he saw something different in it, not just wariness, but genuine consideration. We would need to discuss this, Naya said finally. Of course, take all the time you need. But even as he said it, Elias felt a knot of tension in his chest. He'd offered something unprecedented, something that could change everything for all of them. Now he could only wait and hope that the courage that had prompted the offer would be enough to sustain whatever came next. The three women stepped outside to talk, leaving Elias alone with Kai. The boy looked up at him with those dark, intelligent eyes. They're scared, he said simply. I know they should be, so am I. But you asked anyway. Sometimes fear isn't a good enough reason not to do the right thing. Kai smiled, the first real smile Elias had seen from him. I think my mother would have liked you. The words hit Elias like a blessing and a responsibility all at once. Through the window he could see the three women standing in the snow, their heads close together as they debated his offer. Whatever they decided would set the course for all their lives. But for the first time in 3 years, Elias found himself hoping for a future that included more than just survival. He was hoping for something that looked remarkably like family. Through the frost-covered window, Elias watched the three women stand in a tight circle, their breath creating small clouds in the cold morning air. Their voices were too low to hear, but their body language spoke volumes. Sari's rigid posture, Mira's gentle gestures, and Naya's careful consideration of every word. The weight of his offer hung between them like morning mist, fragile and uncertain. Kai shifted on the sofa behind him, the wooden horse still clutched in his small hands. Naya is remembering, the boy said quietly. Remembering what? The last time we trusted a white man, before the soldiers came. Elias felt ice form in his stomach. He didn't ask for details. Some stories were too painful to tell and too dangerous to know. But he understood why 3 desperate women would hesitate before accepting shelter from a stranger, even one who had shown them kindness. The conversation outside grew more animated. Sari was shaking her head emphatically while Mira placed a calming hand on her arm. Naya stood between them, the weight of decision etched in every line of her face. She was their leader, Elias realized, the one who bore responsibility for their survival. She's thinking of you too, Kai added, of me, of what happens if we keep running, and what does happen. The boy's dark eyes met his. We die. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but winter is long, and we have nowhere left to go. The stark honesty of it cut through Elias like a blade. This wasn't just about offering hospitality, it was about life and death, about a family's last desperate chance at survival. Outside, the women's conversation had quieted. They stood in silence for a long moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Naya nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement, and the 3 of them began walking back toward the cabin. Elias stepped away from the window, his heart hammering against his ribs. Whatever they had decided would change everything. The door opened with a soft creak, and the women filed in, shaking snow from their clothes. Naya's face was unreadable, but Elias caught a glimpse of something in her eyes, not hope exactly, but perhaps the absence of despair. "We have conditions," she said without preamble. Elias nodded. "I'm listening. First, we work for our keep. We are not charity cases." "Agreed." "Second, we leave at the first sign of trouble. If soldiers come, if neighbors ask questions, if anything threatens your safety or ours, we go immediately." "That seems fair?" Sari stepped forward, her hand still resting on her knife handle. "Third, you give us your word that you will not turn us in, no matter what bounty they offer, no matter what threats they make." The request hung in the air between them. Elias understood the weight of what she was asking, not just a promise, but a pledge that would make him complicit in harboring fugitives. If discovered, he would face imprisonment or worse. He thought of Martha's gentle hands, of Sarah's laughter, echoing through the cabin. His family had been taken by violence by the same forces that now hunted these people. Perhaps it was time to choose a different path. "You have my word," he said solemnly. "All of you." Mira smiled, the first genuine warmth he'd seen from any of them. "Then we will try, until spring at least. Or until one of us changes their mind," Sari added, ever the pragmatist. Naya nodded slowly. "We will try." The next hour passed in careful negotiation of practical matters. Sleeping arrangements were discussed and agreed upon. The women would share the small storage room off the kitchen, while Kai would continue using the sofa until they could set up a proper bed for him. Chores were divided according to skills and preferences, with Mira taking charge of cooking and healing, Sari handling security and hunting, and Naya managing the overall organization of their strange new household. "I can help with the cattle," Naya said. "I know horses and cattle both. And I can fix things," Kai piped up from the sofa. "Grandfather taught me to carve and mend before—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the weight of loss was clear in his young voice. "That would be helpful," Elias said gently. "The place always needs fixing." As the morning progressed, the cabin began to transform. Mira unpacked bundles of herbs and began organizing them in Martha's old spice cabinet, asking permission before touching anything. Sari conducted a thorough inspection of the property, checking sight lines and escape routes with military precision. Naya helped Elias with the cattle, her practiced hands gentle but firm as she examined each animal. "You keep good stock," she observed, running her hands along old Bessie's flank. "But this one will calve soon, within the month, I think." Elias looked at the cow with new eyes. He'd noticed she was getting rounder, but hadn't realized how close she was to giving birth. "I've never delivered a calf before." "I have, many times." Naya's voice carried a note of quiet pride. "My people, my father's people, were great horsemen, but we kept cattle too, before the reservation, before everything changed." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the easy rhythm of shared labor creating a tentative bridge between them. Elias found himself studying Naya's profile as she worked, noting the strong line of her jaw, the way she moved with unconscious grace, despite obvious exhaustion. "Why did you really make this offer?" she asked suddenly. Elias paused in his work, considering his answer carefully. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. Part of it was practical. You need shelter. I need help around the place. But part of it, yes. Part of it was that when I looked at Kai yesterday dying by my fence, I saw my daughter. And when I watched you three arrive, ready to fight the world to protect him, I saw what family really means." Naya was quiet for a long moment. "And you miss that?" "More than I thought possible." She nodded slowly. "We miss it too. We had a larger family once, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. The raids scattered us all. Some died, others fled to different places. We four are what remains." "I'm sorry." Sorrow changes nothing, but maybe. She gestured toward the cabin where smoke was rising from the chimney, and the sound of Mira's humming drifted on the cold air. Maybe something new can grow from what was lost. Lunch was a revelation. Mira had taken Elias's simple supplies and transformed them into something that actually resembled a feast. Cornbread with honey beans seasoned with herbs he couldn't identify, and a stew that made his mouth water. "This is incredible," he said after the first bite. Mira beamed with pleasure. Cooking is healing for the soul as well as the body. Even Sari seemed to relax slightly during the meal, though her eyes continued to dart toward the windows. "No tracks in the snow," she reported between bites. "No signs of pursuit." "The nearest neighbor is 12 miles east," Elias told her. "Old Henrik Larsson. Good man, keeps to himself, won't come around unless there's serious trouble. And the town, 23 miles south. I go in maybe once a month for supplies, less in winter." He paused, considering. "People there know me as a loner. If I suddenly start buying supplies for 5 instead of 1, they'll notice." Naya frowned. "We can hunt. Mira knows which plants are safe to eat, even in winter. And we have skills," Sari added. "Things we can trade without going to town." "What kind of things?" The 3 women exchanged a look. Then Mira rose and disappeared into their room, returning with a bundle wrapped in soft leather. She opened it carefully, revealing items that made Elias's breath catch. Beadwork of incredible intricacy adorned a pair of moccasins, the patterns so complex they seemed to move in the firelight. A small pouch was decorated with porcupine quills dyed in brilliant reds and blues. A leather belt was tooled with designs that told a story Elias couldn't read, but somehow understood. "We made these during the long nights of hiding," Mira explained. "When the world was too dangerous for traveling, we kept our hands busy." "These are beautiful," Elias breathed. "People would pay good money for work like this." "But not Apache people," Sari said bitterly, "if they knew who made them." Elias considered this. "Maybe they don't need to know. Maybe you're just skilled craftswomen who prefer to stay out of town. You would do that, sell our work, and let people think what they want. If it keeps you safe and puts food on the table, yes." Another small bridge built another tentative step toward trust. The afternoon brought the first real test of their arrangement. Elias was showing Naya how to work the butter churn when Sari's sharp whistle cut through the air. They all froze, recognizing the warning signal. "Riders," Sari called softly from her position by the window. "2 men coming from the east." Elias felt his blood turn to ice. "Henrik," he said, "and probably his son Lars." In seconds, the cabin erupted into controlled chaos. Mira swept Kai toward their room, while Sari began erasing signs of their presence. Extra plates, Apache belongings, anything that would give them away. Naya moved with fluid grace, helping to hide evidence of their occupation. "Stay in the back room," Elias instructed. "Keep quiet. I'll handle this." But Sari was already at the window with her rifle. "If this goes bad, it won't," Elias said, with more confidence than he felt. "Henrik's a good man." The riders were close now, close enough that Elias could make out Henrik's familiar slouched posture in the saddle. The old Norwegian farmer was tough as jerky and twice as stubborn, but he was also fair-minded and minded his own business. Elias stepped onto the porch just as Henrik and his son reined in their horses. Both men looked tired and cold, their faces serious. "Henrik," Elias called out, "what brings you out in this weather?" "Afternoon, Elias," Henrik replied, dismounting stiffly. "Sorry to bother you, but we got some trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Lars, Henrik's 20-year-old son, spoke up. "Apache's, Mr. Grant. Army patrol came through yesterday, said there's a war party in the area. They're tracking them south." Elias forced his face to remain neutral. "War party. 3 women and a child," Henrik said. "Dangerous, according to the lieutenant. Wanted to know if we'd seen anything suspicious." "Have you?" "Nah, nothing. But they said to check with all the ranchers, make sure everyone knows to be careful. Henrik's weathered face creased with concern. You being out here alone and all, we thought we should warn you. I appreciate that, Elias said, amazed at how steady his voice sounded. Haven't seen anything unusual myself. Lars peered past him toward the cabin. Smoke's coming pretty thick from your chimney. You burning a lot of wood. Elias's heart skipped a beat, but he managed to laugh. Storm blew some snow down the flue yesterday. Been fighting to keep a decent fire going ever since. Henrik nodded sympathetically. Hate when that happens. Well, we just wanted to make sure you were aware. These Apaches are supposed to be particularly desperate. Lost their tribe, nowhere left to run. Sounds like they're more scared than dangerous, Elias observed carefully. Maybe so, but scared people do unpredictable things. Henrik remounted his horse with a grunt of effort. You got your rifle handy. Always do. Good man, if you see anything at all, you fire 3 shots into the air. We'll come running, and so will the army patrol. I'll remember that. The 2 men turned their horses toward home, but Henrik paused and looked back. You sure you're all right out here, Elias? You look a little peaked. For a moment, Elias wondered if somehow the old farmer could see the guilt written on his face. Just tired. This weather takes it out of you. Ain't that the truth? Well, take care of yourself and keep that rifle close. Elias watched them ride away until they disappeared into the gray afternoon, then hurried back inside. The cabin seemed almost empty after hiding 4 people, but they emerged quickly from the back room. Army patrol, Elias said without preamble, tracking 3 women and a child. Sari's face went hard. How close? Close enough that they're warning the neighbors, but Henrik doesn't suspect anything. Yet, Naya said quietly, but if they search house to house, we leave, Sari declared, tonight, before they get closer. In this weather, with Kai still recovering. Mira shook her head. That's death. Staying might be death too. Elias found himself speaking before he'd fully formed the thought. There's another option. They all looked at him. The old mine shaft, about 2 miles north up in the rocks. Been abandoned for 10 years, but it's dry and hidden. If the army comes here, you could hide there until they pass. And if they don't pass, Sari demanded, if they set up a permanent patrol, then we figure something else out. Naya studied his face intently. You're taking a terrible risk if they find us here. I know. Elias met her gaze steadily. But I gave you my word, all of you. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken understanding. They were past the point of easy choices, past the luxury of simple solutions. Whatever happened next would test them all. Show me this mine, Naya said finally. They spent the remainder of the afternoon preparing for the possibility of flight. Mira packed medical supplies and what food could be easily carried. Sari cleaned weapons and planned escape routes. Kai, understanding the gravity of the situation despite his youth, helped organize supplies with quiet efficiency. Elias led Naya to the mine as the sun began to set, the abandoned shaft hidden in a cluster of rocks that formed a natural fortress. The entrance was narrow, easily missed unless you knew where to look. It goes back maybe 50 yards, Elias explained, lighting a torch to illuminate the interior. There's a chamber at the back big enough for 4 people. Water seeps through the rocks here so you wouldn't die of thirst. Naya examined the space with a practiced eye. Defensible, she murmured, but also a trap if they find it. Better than being caught in the open. Yes, she turned to him, her dark eyes serious in the flickering torchlight. Why are you doing this, really? Elias considered lying, giving her some noble explanation about justice and humanity. But something about this woman, this strong, dangerous, desperate woman, demanded honesty. Because 3 days ago I was ready to die, he said simply. Not suicide, nothing dramatic, just giving up. Letting the loneliness and grief eat me away until there was nothing left. Then I found Kai, and suddenly I had a purpose again, something worth protecting. And now I remember what it feels like to have a family, even if it's not the family I expected." Naya was quiet for a long moment. "You understand that we may bring death to your door. You might, but you've already brought life back into my home." They returned to the cabin as darkness fell, the windows glowing warmly in the gathering dusk. Inside, Mira had prepared another feast, and Kai was entertaining them all with stories about his wooden horse, which apparently had traveled great distances and had many adventures. "His name is Wind Runner," Kai explained seriously. "My grandfather carved him. He said every boy needs a horse that can outrun danger." "Smart grandfather," Elias said. "He was. He knew many stories about the old days, when our people lived free." Kai's voice carried a wistful note. "I wish you could have heard them." "Maybe you could tell me some." Kai's face lit up. "Really? You want to hear Apache stories?" "I'd be honored." As the evening progressed, the tension from the afternoon's visit began to ease. Mira worked on her beadwork while Naya mended clothes. Sari maintained her watch but seemed less rigid, occasionally adding comments to the conversation. And Kai regaled them with tales of Coyote, the trickster, and Mouse who stole fire from the sun. But underneath the domestic tranquility, they all knew their situation had become more precarious. The army was closing in, and their fragile sanctuary could be discovered at any moment. "We need a story," Naya said suddenly. "If soldiers come here, if they question us, we need a reason for being here that doesn't involve harboring fugitives." Elias had been thinking the same thing. "Cousins," he said, "from California. Your husband died, left you with nothing. You came here looking for work and shelter. 3 Apache women with a white rancher." Sari shook her head. "No one will believe that." "Half-breed," Mira suggested quietly. "We could pass for half-breed if we dressed the part, spoke only English." It was a dangerous game they were proposing, trying to hide in plain sight by pretending to be something they weren't. But it might work if they were careful. "I have some of Martha's old dresses," Elias offered. "They might fit." The women exchanged glances. Wearing white women's clothing would be another kind of surrender, another piece of their identity sacrificed for survival. "If it keeps us alive," Naya said pragmatically. They spent an hour going through Martha's wardrobe, finding clothes that would fit and look convincing. Seeing the 3 Apache women in his wife's dresses was jarring for Elias, a collision of past and present that left him unsettled. But Naya, in Martha's blue calico dress, her hair pinned up in the white fashion, could indeed pass for a woman of mixed heritage. Mira's round face and gentle manner made her transformation even more believable. Only Sari seemed uncomfortable in the disguise her warriors bearing, still visible beneath the feminine facade. "Practice," Naya instructed. "We must practice being these other women until it becomes second nature." They rehearsed their story, working out details and refining their performances. Kai would be Naya's son, close enough to the truth that it wouldn't require much acting. They would all claim to be from a small town in California that no longer existed, victims of flood and economic hardship who had come east seeking opportunity. "What about our names?" Mira asked. "Keep your own," Elias suggested. "Changing names completely is dangerous. You might forget to respond to them at a crucial moment. But Apache names will give us away. Not if you claim they're Spanish. Naya could be short for Ignacia. Mira means look in Spanish. And Sari," he paused, thinking, "Sarah, close enough to your real name that you'll answer to it naturally." By the time they went to bed that night, they had constructed an entire false history for themselves. It wasn't perfect, but it might be enough to fool a casual inquiry. Elias lay awake long after the others had settled into sleep, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a house filled with people. Mira's gentle snoring from the back room, Sari's quiet movements as she took her watch by the window, Kai's soft breathing from the sofa. and underlying it all the knowledge that tomorrow might bring soldiers' discovery and the end of everything they were trying to build. But for tonight, his cabin was warm and full of life. For tonight, he had a family again. Whatever the cost, whatever the risk, he would protect that with everything he had. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering their tracks and erasing the evidence of their presence. Nature, at least, seemed to be on their side. Now they could only wait and hope that human nature would prove as forgiving. The wooden horse sat on the mantel, its carved features seeming almost alive in the flickering firelight. Windrunner Kai had called it, a horse that could outrun danger. Elias found himself hoping that all of them, this strange, fragile family he'd somehow acquired, would prove as swift and sure as that carved stallion. Because morning was coming, and with it the rest of their lives. Morning arrived with deceptive calm, the kind of stillness that preceded either peace or catastrophe. Elias woke to the sound of Mira humming in the kitchen, a melody he didn't recognize but that seemed to fill the cabin with warmth. Through his bedroom window he could see Naya already outside, moving among the cattle with the easy confidence of someone born to the work. The sight stopped him cold. In Martha's blue dress, her dark hair pinned up beneath a worn bonnet, Naya looked every inch the frontier wife. The transformation was so complete it was almost unsettling. This was their new reality, layers of deception, worn like armor against a world that would kill them for being themselves. "Morning," Mira called softly as he entered the kitchen. She wore Martha's green wool dress, the one his wife had saved for Sundays. On Mira's fuller figure it looked different, but somehow right, as if the dress had been waiting for someone who understood the importance of making a house feel like home. "How long has she been out there?" Elias asked, nodding toward the window where Naya was examining old Bessie's swollen sides. "Before dawn. She said the cow was restless in the night." Mira handed him a cup of coffee, the liquid dark and strong. "She thinks today, maybe tomorrow." The birth of new life in the midst of their precarious situation felt like both blessing and curse. A calf would mean prosperity for the ranch, but it would also mean being tied to one place at the most dangerous possible time. Sari appeared from the back room, and Elias had to blink twice. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the sharp-eyed warrior, replaced by a young woman in a simple brown dress, her long hair braided and pinned in the style white women favored. Only her eyes remained the same, alert and calculating. "Any sign of trouble?" Elias asked. "Nothing yet, but the morning is young." She moved to the window with practiced casualness, her gaze sweeping the horizon. "Your neighbor yesterday, Henrik. How well do you know him?" "Well enough. He's been here longer than anyone came over from Norway 20 years ago. Honest man, but he's got strong opinions about Indians." Hostile opinions. Elias considered this carefully. He's never had trouble with Apache, but he lost a cousin to Comanche raids down in Texas. Makes him cautious. Sari nodded grimly. Cautious men ask questions. Kai emerged from his makeshift bed on the sofa, his hair tousled and his small face still soft with sleep. In the morning light, wearing clothes Elias had found for him, a pair of Sarah's old breeches, and one of her shirts, he looked like any frontier boy. "Is Naya really going to help the cow have her baby?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "If the cow needs help, yes," Mira replied, ruffling his hair. "Naya knows about these things." "Will it hurt?" "Birth always hurts a little," Mira said gently. "But it's a good hurt, the kind that brings new life into the world." Elias found himself watching this exchange with fascination. In just 3 days, these strangers had begun to feel like family in ways he hadn't expected. Mira's maternal instincts, Sari's protective vigilance, Naya's quiet strength, each woman brought something essential to their small community. They were interrupted by Naya's voice calling from outside. "Elias, you need to see this." The tone made them all freeze. Sari's hand went immediately to her knife while Mira pulled Kai closer to her side. Elias grabbed his rifle and headed for the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. Outside, Naya stood beside old Bessie, her face pale but determined. She's having trouble. The calf is turned wrong. Relief flooded through Elias so powerfully he nearly laughed. Not soldiers, not discovery, just the ancient drama of birth and the complications that sometimes came with it. Can you help her? I think so, but I'll need assistance. Naya's eyes met his, and he saw the weight of responsibility there. If we lose her, you lose your best breeding cow. If we don't try, we lose her anyway. Naya nodded and began rolling up her sleeves. Mira, I need hot water and clean rags. Sari, watch the horizon. Kai. She paused, considering. Kai, you talk to Bessie. Keep her calm. What followed was an education in both veterinary medicine and human character. Naya worked with a skill that spoke of years of experience, her hands gentle but sure as she examined the laboring cow. Mira provided assistance with the efficiency of a trained midwife, anticipating needs before they were voiced. Even Sari contributed her warrior's discipline, proving useful as she maintained watch while helping to restrain the frightened animal. And Kai, small and young as he was, seemed to have an instinctive understanding of how to soothe the cow's fears. There, Naya said, finally, sweat beading her forehead. Despite the cold, I can feel the head. It's just turned slightly. There. Old Bessie let out a long, low moan, and suddenly everything happened at once. The calf emerged in a rush of fluid and membrane, landing in the straw with a wet thud. For a terrifying moment it lay still. Then Naya cleared its mouth and nose, and the small creature drew its first shuddering breath. Is it alive? Kai whispered. Very much alive, Naya said, with the first genuine smile Elias had seen from her. And it's a heifer, a female. She'll make a good breeding cow someday. As if to prove the point, the calf struggled to its feet on wobbling legs and immediately began searching for her mother's milk. Bessie, exhausted but content, began the ancient ritual of cleaning her baby. That was incredible, Elias breathed. I've never seen anything like it. Life finds a way, Mira said softly. Even in the darkest times, life finds a way. They stood there for a moment, watching the new mother and her calf, all of them touched by the simple miracle they'd witnessed. In the midst of fear and uncertainty, new life had entered the world. It felt like a sign, though, of what Elias couldn't say. The peaceful moment was shattered by Sari's sharp intake of breath. Riders, she said quietly, coming fast from the south. Elias felt his blood turn to ice. The south meant town, meant authority, meant trouble. How many? 4, maybe 5, blue uniforms, army patrol. The moment they'd all been dreading had arrived. Inside, Elias ordered. Now, remember who you are. They moved with practiced efficiency, the result of their rehearsals the night before. Mira and Kai disappeared into the cabin while Sari positioned herself by a window with a clear view but good cover. Naya began cleaning herself up, wiping away the evidence of her veterinary work. You were helping me with a difficult calving, Elias reminded her quickly. That's all, nothing more. She nodded, pinning a loose strand of hair back into place. In Martha's dress and bonnet, she looked every inch the respectable frontier woman. The transformation still amazed him. The riders were close now, close enough that Elias could make out individual faces. A young lieutenant led the patrol, his uniform crisp despite the cold. Behind him rode 4 enlisted men, their faces hard, with the professional wariness of soldiers in hostile territory. Elias stepped onto his porch rifle in hand, but held casually. The lieutenant reined in his horse about 20 feet from the cabin, his pale eyes taking in every detail of the scene. Good morning, the officer called out. Lieutenant Morrison, United States Army. Are you Elias Grant? I am. What can I do for you, Lieutenant? We're tracking a group of hostile Apache. 3 women and a child. They were last seen in this area. Morrison's gaze shifted to Naya, who was emerging from the barn. Who's that? Elias felt sweat break out on his forehead despite the cold. This was the test they'd prepared for, but all their rehearsals hadn't prepared him for the reality of lying to armed soldiers. That's my cousin-in-law, Naya. She's helping me with some difficult cattle. He gestured toward the barn. Just had a calf born, needed an extra pair of hands. Morrison's eyes narrowed as he studied Naya's appearance. She walked toward them with measured steps, her posture perfectly mimicking that of a modest frontier woman. "Morning, Lieutenant," she said, her voice carrying just the right note of respectful deference. "Is there some trouble?" "There might be. You're Mexican, half Spanish, half Apache," she replied without hesitation, sticking to their rehearsed story. "From California originally." The admission of Apache blood was a calculated risk, but denying it entirely would have been impossible if anyone looked closely at her features. Better to claim mixed heritage and hope it would explain away any inconsistencies. "Apache blood," Morrison mused. "That's interesting. You wouldn't happen to know anything about 3 Apache women and a child who've been raiding in this area." Raiding, Naya's surprise seemed genuine. "I haven't heard anything about raids." "Well, they haven't exactly been advertising their presence." Morrison dismounted, his movements casual but alert. "Mind if we take a look around? Just routine, you understand?" Elias felt his heart sink. A search would reveal evidence of 4 extra people living in his cabin, no matter how careful they'd been. "Of course not," he said, hoping his voice sounded steadier than he felt. "Though I should warn you, we've got a new calf in the barn. Mother's still pretty protective." "We'll be careful," Morrison signaled to his men, who began spreading out to examine the property. As they moved toward the cabin, Elias caught Naya's eye. She gave an almost imperceptible nod. She understood the danger, was ready for whatever came next. Inside the cabin, they found Mira at the stove, stirring a pot of stew that filled the small space with rich, savory smells. She looked up with mild curiosity as the soldiers entered, playing her part perfectly. "Oh, hello," she said with gentle surprise. "I didn't realize we had visitors." "This is my other cousin, Mira," Elias explained, "and her boy, Kai." Kai sat at the table working on a piece of carving with intense concentration. He looked up briefly, nodded politely to the soldiers, then returned to his work. The picture of a shy frontier child. Morrison's gaze swept the cabin, taking in the cooking pot, the extra bedding, the subtle signs of more people than Elias usually housed. "Quite a family gathering you have here, Mr. Grant." "Hard times in California," Naya explained. "Floods wiped out most of the farms in our area. We came here looking for work and a fresh start." "When did you arrive?" 3 days ago, Mira answered. "Mr. Grant was kind enough to take us in until we can find permanent situations." The lieutenant nodded thoughtfully. "And where exactly in California are you from?" "Visalia," Sari said, from where she stood in the doorway, having entered silently during the conversation, "or what's left of it after the floods." Morrison turned to study her, and Elias held his breath. Sari was the hardest to disguise. Her warrior's bearing was difficult to completely suppress, and her eyes held a sharpness that suggested she was considerably more dangerous than she appeared. "You're very quiet, miss," Morrison observed. "I'm not much for talking to strangers," Sari replied with perfect frontier directness. "Especially armed strangers." The lieutenant actually smiled at that. "Fair enough. Can't say I blame you for being cautious." One of the enlisted men returned from searching the back room. "Nothing unusual, sir. Just women's belongings and some very fine beadwork." "Beadwork?" Mira nodded toward the displayed pieces they'd left visible. "I make things to sell. We're hoping to take them to market in town when the weather improves." Morrison examined the intricate beadwork with obvious appreciation. "This is excellent craftsmanship, Apache style, but very refined." "My grandmother taught me," Mira said smoothly. She was full-blood Apache before she married my grandfather. It was a dangerous admission, but one that explained both the quality of the work and Mira's obvious expertise. Morrison nodded approvingly. Well, it's beautiful work. I'm sure you'll find a good market for it. He turned back to Elias. Now about these hostels we're tracking. Have you seen anything unusual in the past few days? Smoke where it shouldn't be, missing livestock, anything out of the ordinary? Elias shook his head. Nothing like that. Of course, with this weather I haven't been ranging far from the cabin. What about tracks, horse prints, footprints, anything that might indicate someone passing through? Snow's covered most everything, Naya volunteered, though I did see what might have been horse tracks near the old mine shaft to the north. Could have been wild horses, though. Elias's blood froze. Why was she directing them toward their planned hiding place? Then understanding dawned, she was giving them information they could easily verify, making herself appear helpful while actually controlling what they found. Morrison's eyes sharpened with interest. Horse tracks. How fresh. Hard to say with all the snow. Could have been yesterday, could have been last week. Show me. It wasn't a request. Morrison was clearly a man accustomed to being obeyed. Naya nodded calmly. Of course, though it's a bit of a ride in this weather. We're used to rough weather. Morrison turned to his men. Johnson, Collins, you stay here and continue searching the property. Williams, you're with me. As they prepared to leave, Kai looked up from his carving. Are the Apache really dangerous? He asked with a child's innocent curiosity. Morrison's expression softened slightly. Some are sun, but don't you worry, we'll catch these ones soon enough. What happens when you catch them? The question hung in the air like smoke. Morrison's face hardened again. They'll face justice for their crimes. Elias knew what that meant. There would be no trial, no opportunity for explanation or mercy. Justice in this case meant death. After Morrison and his man rode away with Naya, an oppressive silence fell over the cabin. The two remaining soldiers continued their search, but with less enthusiasm than their commanding officer. They seemed more interested in staying warm than conducting a thorough investigation. Mira continued cooking as if nothing unusual was happening, but Elias could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. Sari maintained her position by the window, tracking the movements of the soldiers outside. And Kai, bless him, continued carving his piece of wood with the focused intensity of a child absorbed in important work. What's that going to be? One of the soldiers asked, nodding toward Kai's project. A horse, Kai replied without looking up. For racing. You like horses. I love horses. Someday I'm going to have a real one. The soldier smiled, the first genuine warmth Elias had seen from any of them. What kind of horse? Fast one, fast enough to outrun anything. The innocent conversation continued, but Elias found himself thinking about Naya, alone with Morrison, and his companion leading them to the mine shaft where they might have been hiding. What would she tell them if they pressed for details? How long could she maintain her deception under direct questioning? Time crawled by with agonizing slowness. Mira served the soldiers coffee, playing the perfect hostess, while Sari watched from the shadows. The men seemed to be relaxing, lulled by the warmth of the cabin and the obvious domesticity of the scene. You folks planning to stay here long? One of them asked. Depends on what kind of work we can find, Sari replied. Winter's hard, but come spring there should be opportunities. What kind of work are you looking for? Anything honest. Cooking, cleaning, sewing. I'm good with horses if anyone needs help with livestock. The soldier nodded. There's usually work to be found come roundup season. A lot of the ranchers need extra hands. It was such a normal conversation, the kind that might happen anywhere on the frontier between neighbors and strangers. But underneath the ordinary words, Elias could feel the dangerous current of their situation. One wrong word, one suspicious detail, and everything they'd built could collapse. The sound of returning horses broke the tension. Through the window, Elias could see Morrison and his companion riding back toward the cabin with Naya between them. Her posture was relaxed, her face calm. Whatever had happened at the mine, it had apparently gone well. Morrison dismounted and entered the cabin, shaking snow from his coat. "Found the tracks your cousin mentioned," he told Elias. "Definitely horses, but they look old. Probably wild stock, like she said." "Any sign of the Apache?" Mira asked, with what seemed like genuine concern. "Not at that location, but they're out there somewhere." Morrison's eyes swept the cabin one more time, as if looking for details he might have missed. "We'll be expanding our search pattern, covering more ground. If you see anything at all, you send word immediately." "Of course," Elias agreed. "How do we reach you?" "Send someone to Fort Apache. Ask for Lieutenant Morrison. They'll know how to find me." Morrison gathered his men and prepared to leave, but paused at the door. "One more thing, Mr. Grant. These Apache we're hunting, they're not ordinary renegades. They've been involved in several incidents over the past few months. Livestock theft, property damage, at least one suspected murder." Elias felt his heart sink. They were describing the women as hardened criminals building a case for extreme measures. "If they approach this ranch," Morrison continued, "don't try to be a hero. Give them whatever they want and send word to us as soon as it's safe. Understood, understood." Morrison mounted his horse and looked down at the small group standing on the porch. "You folks take care of yourselves. And remember, stay alert. These Apache are desperate, and desperate people are dangerous." With that ominous warning, the patrol rode away, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy with unspoken fears. They waited until the soldiers were completely out of sight before allowing themselves to speak. Even then, their voices were barely above whispers, as if the very air might carry their words to unfriendly ears. "How did it go?" Elias asked Naya. "Well enough. I showed them the tracks, old deer prints mostly, but they looked like they could have been from horses." Morrison seemed satisfied. "Did he ask many questions?" "A few. Where I was from, how long I'd been here, what I knew about Apache customs." Naya's mouth quirked in a bitter smile. "I told him my Apache grandmother had died when I was young, so I didn't know much about the old ways." "And he believed it. He wanted to believe it. Sometimes that's enough." Sari shook her head grimly. "This time maybe, but they'll be back, and next time they might be more thorough." "What did Morrison mean about incidents?" Mira asked quietly. "Livestock theft and murder." Naya's face darkened. "Probably true, but not by us. There are other Apache, still free, still fighting. We get blamed for everything they do." "Does it matter?" Sari asked bitterly. "Guilty or innocent, we all look the same to them." The truth of that statement hung over them like a storm cloud. They had passed this test, but there would be others, and each time the stakes would be higher. "We need to be more careful," Elias said finally. "No more Apache words, even between ourselves. No traditional foods or medicines unless absolutely necessary. We have to become the people we're pretending to be." It was a hard thing to ask, to give up the last vestiges of their identity for the sake of survival. But they all understood the necessity. "What about the calf?" Kai asked. "Can we still take care of her?" The question brought them all back to the simple reality of life on the ranch. Whatever dangers lurked beyond their boundaries, there were still daily tasks to be completed, animals to be fed, a living to be earned. "Of course we can," Naya said, her voice gentle. "Life doesn't stop because we're afraid." They spent the rest of the day settling into their new reality. Mira reorganized the kitchen, making it more efficient for cooking for 5 people. Sari scouted additional escape routes and hiding places, her warrior's mind always planning for the next crisis. Naya worked with the cattle, ensuring that old Bessie and her calf were both healthy and strong. And Kai continued his carving, the wooden horse taking shape under his patient hands. Watching the boy work, Elias was struck by the resilience of youth, the ability to find joy and purpose, even in the darkest circumstances. As evening fell, they gathered around the fireplace for their second family meal. The conversation was subdued, weighted with the knowledge of how close they'd come to disaster, But there was also a sense of quiet triumph. They had faced their first real test and emerged intact. "Morrison will file a report," Sari said as she took the first watch. "They'll mark this location as searched and probably won't come back for a while." "How long?" Elias asked. "Weeks, maybe months. Depends on what else they find." It wasn't much of a reprieve, but it was something. Time to strengthen their cover story, to become more comfortable in their assumed roles, to prepare for whatever challenges lay ahead. "Tomorrow," Naya said, "we start planning for spring, crops to plant, improvements to make, a life to build." It sounded like hope, fragile and uncertain, but real nonetheless. They had survived another day, protected each other through another crisis. Perhaps that was enough. Outside, the wind howled around the cabin, but inside, the fire burned warm and bright. 5 people who had been strangers a week ago sat together like a family, bound by necessity and growing affection into something neither of them had expected. The wooden horse sat on the mantel, still unfinished, but clearly taking the shape Kai envisioned. Windrunner, he called it, a horse fast enough to outrun danger, strong enough to carry its rider to safety. Looking around at his unlikely family, Elias found himself hoping that all of them possessed something of that carved stallion's speed and strength, because the race they were running was far from over, and the finish line was still lost somewhere in an uncertain future. But the race would demand more than speed alone. 2 weeks passed in careful routine, each day building upon the fragile foundation of their assumed lives. The rhythm of deception became as natural as breathing. Naya checking the cattle in Martha's worn dresses, Mira humming Spanish lullabies to Kai instead of Apache ones, Sari teaching herself to walk with smaller steps and softer gestures. The transformation ran deeper than clothes and mannerisms. Elias watched it happen gradually, like snow melting to reveal new ground beneath. During the day, they were the Grant family's California cousins, refugees, seeking a fresh start. But in the evenings, by firelight, fragments of their true selves emerged in careful whispers. "Tell me about your grandfather," Elias asked Kai one night as the boy put finishing touches on his wooden horse. Kai's small fingers traced the carved mane with reverence. He was a storyteller and a horsebreaker. He could gentle the wildest Mustang with just his voice. The boy's eyes grew distant. He said, "Horses understand hearts better than words. That's why Windrunner will be so fast, because I carved him with my heart." What stories did he tell? About the old days when our people followed the buffalo and the seasons, when the world was bigger and there was room for everyone. Kai looked up at his dark eyes, serious. "Do you think those days will ever come back?" The question pierced Elias like an arrow. How did you explain to a child that some things once lost could never be recovered, that the world they were carving from secrecy and lies might be all the home they ever had? "Maybe not those exact days," he said carefully, "but maybe we can build something new, something good." Naya, mending clothes by the firelight, glanced up at his words. Their eyes met across the small space, and something passed between them, not quite understanding, but the beginning of it. The first real test of their growing bond came 3 weeks after Morrison's visit, when Henrik Larsson arrived at their door with troubling news. "Elias," the old Norwegian said, removing his hat as he entered the warm cabin, "I bring word from town. There's been more Apache trouble." Elias felt his blood chill, but kept his voice steady. "What kind of trouble?" "Raid on the Hendricks place, 15 miles south. Took their horses, burned their barn, killed 2 of their hands." Henrik's weathered face was grim. "Army's forming a larger patrol. They're talking about bringing in Apache scouts to track the hostiles." Apache scouts. Apache working for the army to hunt their own people. It was the nightmare scenario none of them had spoken aloud. Naya set down her sewing with hands that barely trembled. "Apache scouts. Reservation Apache mostly. The army says they know the country better than white soldiers can follow, sign that others would miss." Henrik studied her face with sharp blue eyes. "You being part Apache yourself, what do you think of that?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Elias held his breath, waiting to see how Naya would navigate this treacherous ground. "I think desperate men do desperate things," she said finally, "both the ones being hunted and the ones doing the hunting." Henrik nodded thoughtfully. "Wise words. Still, it makes things more dangerous for everyone. Army captain asked me to tell all the ranchers, anyone sees anything suspicious, anything at all, they want to know immediately." "Of course," Elias agreed. "We'll keep our eyes open." After Henrik left, the cabin felt smaller, the walls closer. Apache scouts changed everything. White soldiers might be fooled by their disguises, but Apache eyes would see what others missed. "How long do we have?" Mira asked quietly. "Not long," Sari replied. "If they're bringing in scouts, they'll sweep this area again within days." "Then we run," Naya said simply. "Where?" Elias demanded. "Winter's not half over and Kai's still not strong enough for hard travel." "I'm strong enough," Kai protested, but his thin frame argued otherwise. "You're braver than you are strong, little warrior," Naya said gently, "and that's not your fault." They spent the evening in hushed discussion, weighing options that all seemed to lead to disaster. The old mine shaft wouldn't fool Apache scouts. Running in winter weather could kill them as surely as capture. Staying meant eventual discovery. "There might be another way," Elias said slowly. "It's dangerous, but it could work." They all looked at him expectantly. "We don't hide from the scouts. We use them." Sari's hand moved instinctively to her knife. "Explain." "Tomorrow I ride to town. I tell the army I've been thinking about Henrik's visit, and I remembered something. Tracks near the old mine shaft may be fresher than I first thought. I volunteer to guide them there." "That's insane," Sari said flatly. "Listen, while I'm gone, you three take Kai and hide in the mine. When the patrol arrives, I lead them straight there. But you're not hiding as Apache fugitives. You're hiding as my cousins, terrified by rumors of Apache raiders." Understanding dawned in Naya's eyes. "We become the frightened settlers seeking protection." "Exactly. When we find you in the mine, you're refugees who panicked and hid when you heard riders approaching. The scouts see 3 scared women and a boy, not the Apache they're hunting." "It could work," Mira said slowly, "if we play it right." "And if we don't?" Sari asked. "Then we die," Elias said simply. "But we die trying to stay together." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Elias prepared to ride to town, his stomach tight with anxiety. Everything depended on his ability to sell the story, to seem helpful without appearing suspicious. "If this goes wrong," Naya began. "It won't," he interrupted. "It can't." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "Ride carefully." The journey to town felt endless, each mile stretching like hours. Elias rehearsed his story, refining details and anticipating questions. By the time he reached the army post, he had convinced himself of his own fiction. Captain Thomas Mitchell was a career soldier, his gray beard and scarred hands speaking of decades on the frontier. He listened to Elias's report with sharp attention. "You're certain these tracks were fresh?" "More certain now than I was before. Been thinking about it ever since your lieutenant's visit. The way the snow had drifted around them, the depth of the impressions, they couldn't have been more than a day or 2 old." Mitchell studied a map spread across his desk. "This mine shaft, good hiding place. Best in the area. Deep, hidden, defensible. If I were running from the army, that's where I'd go." "All right, Mr. Grant, we'll investigate. Be ready to guide us at first light tomorrow." "Actually, Captain, I was thinking we might want to move sooner. If they are using the mine, they might move on if they get spooked." Mitchell's eyes sharpened. "What do you mean? My California cousins have been staying with me. City women not used to frontier dangers. When I told them about the Apache raids, they panicked. Insisted on hiding somewhere safe until the danger passed." "Where did they go?" "The mine shaft. I couldn't talk them out of it. They're probably scared half to death by now." It was a masterful touch, giving the captain a reason to find people at the mine while establishing their presence as innocent. "Then we'd better collect them before they freeze," Mitchell said grimly, "or before something worse finds them." 2 hours later, a patrol of 8 soldiers and 2 Apache scouts rode out of town with Elias as their guide. He tried not to stare at the scouts, but couldn't help himself. Both were young men, probably in their 20s, with the lean build and alert eyes of born trackers. One of them, riding a paint horse with easy grace, caught Elias's attention. "You are the rancher?" he asked in accented English. I am Joseph. This is my brother Samuel." The scout's dark eyes were intelligent and curious. "You have seen Apache sign?" "I think so, but I'm no tracker." Joseph nodded. "We will see." The ride to the ranch passed in tense silence. Elias found himself studying the 2 scouts, trying to read their expressions. Were they true believers in the Army's cause, or were they simply doing what they had to do to survive? At the ranch, Joseph and Samuel examined the ground around the mine shaft with professional thoroughness. Elias had been careful to create the right kind of evidence boot prints that could belong to Apache women, disturbed earth that suggested recent habitation. "Someone has been here," Samuel confirmed. "Recently." Captain Mitchell nodded grimly. "Surround the mine. I want anyone inside to know they have no escape." Elias's heart pounded as the soldiers took positions around the mine entrance. Everything depended on the next few minutes. If Naya, Mira, and Sari couldn't sell their performance, they were all dead. "Hello in there," Mitchell called out. "This is Captain Mitchell, United States Army. Come out with your hands visible." For a moment, there was only silence. Then Mira's voice echoed from the mine depths, high and frightened. "Don't shoot, we're not Apache. We're just hiding. Come out slowly. Keep your hands where we can see them." What emerged from the mine was a masterpiece of theater. Mira appeared first, clutching Kai to her chest, both of them dirty and wide-eyed with apparent terror. Naya and Sari followed their postures, perfect studies in feminine fear and vulnerability. "Thank God!" Naya gasped, rushing toward Elias. "We heard riders and we thought it might be the Apache." Joseph and Samuel studied the 4 refugees with sharp eyes. Elias held his breath, waiting for recognition, for the moment when trained Apache eyes would see through their deception. "You are from California?" Joseph asked Naya directly. "Yes, Visalia. We came here after the floods." Her voice carried just the right note of nervous respect. "You speak Spanish?" "Some. My grandmother taught me." "Say something in Spanish." Without hesitation, Naya launched into a rapid stream of Spanish, describing their fear and gratitude for rescue. It was flawless, the accent perfect. Joseph listened carefully, then nodded to Captain Mitchell. "She speaks like someone from California. Accent is correct." Elias nearly sagged with relief. The first hurdle was passed. "What were you doing in the mine?" Mitchell asked. "Hiding," Sari said simply. "Mr. Grant told us about the Apache raids, and we were terrified. The mine seemed like the safest place." "For 3 days? We brought supplies," Mira said, gesturing to bundles they'd prepared. "Food, blankets, water. We thought it was better to be uncomfortable than dead." Mitchell examined their supplies, finding exactly what he'd expect from frightened settlers. "This was foolish. You could have frozen to death." "Better than being scalped," Kai said with a child's blunt honesty. The soldiers laughed, the tension breaking slightly. Children, after all, were innocent. Children couldn't be dangerous Apache warriors, but Samuel was still studying the mine entrance with thoughtful eyes. "Captain," he said quietly, "I want to examine the interior." Elias's blood turned to ice. Inside the mine, despite their precautions, there might be evidence of longer habitation. Apache belongings, they'd missed signs that would give them away. "Of course," Mitchell agreed. "Mr. Grant, did your cousins disturb anything inside?" "I don't think so. They were too frightened to explore." Samuel disappeared into the mine with a torch, his brother close behind. The wait that followed felt eternal. Elias found himself memorizing details, the way Naya stood protectively near Kai, The nervous way Mira twisted her hands, the alert stillness with which Sari watched the soldiers. Finally, the scouts emerged. Samuel's face was thoughtful but not suspicious. "The mine has been used recently," he reported, "but only for a few days. No sign of long-term habitation. Apache sign, nothing definitive. The ground is disturbed, but that could be from anyone." Mitchell nodded. "Well, Mr. Grant, it seems your cousins chose their hiding place well. Any Apache using this mine would have found it occupied." "So we're safe?" Mira asked hopefully. "For now, but I strongly advise you to return to the ranch house. It's safer and warmer." As they prepared to leave the mine, Joseph approached Naya with something in his hand. Elias's heart stopped when he saw what it was, a small piece of Apache beadwork, probably dropped during their hasty preparation. "You dropped this," Joseph said quietly, offering it to her. Naya took the beadwork with steady hands. "Thank you. It was my grandmother's. I carry it for luck." "It's beautiful work," Joseph observed. "Traditional Apache pattern." "Yes, she taught me a little about beadwork before she died." Joseph studied her face for a long moment, and Elias was certain they were discovered. Then the scout smiled slightly. "Your grandmother had skilled hands. You honor her memory by keeping her work safe." It was both acceptance and warning, Elias realized. Joseph knew exactly what he was looking at, but he was choosing to accept their story. Perhaps because he understood something about the necessity of survival, the prices people paid to stay alive. The patrol escorted them back to the ranch house, where Mitchell gave Elias stern instructions about reporting any suspicious activity. As the soldiers prepared to leave, Joseph lingered behind. "Mr. Grant," he said quietly, "your cousins seem like good people. The frontier can be dangerous for women and children. I'll take care of them. I'm sure you will." Joseph's eyes were unreadable. Sometimes the best way to take care of people is to help them find somewhere safe to settle, permanently. The message was clear. Don't let this happen again. Next time we might not be so understanding. "I understand," Elias replied. As the patrol rode away, Elias felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. They had done it, faced their greatest test, and emerged unscathed. But the cost was clear in all their faces. They were living on borrowed time, and everyone knew it. That evening, as they sat around the fireplace, the weight of their close call pressed down on them like storm clouds. "Joseph knew," Naya said quietly. "He knew exactly who we were." "Then why didn't he expose us?" Sari asked. "Because he understands," Mira replied. "He knows what it means to be caught between two worlds, to do whatever it takes to survive." Elias found himself thinking about Joseph's warning. They needed to find a permanent solution, a way to build a real life instead of just hiding from death. "We can't keep doing this," he said finally, "living like ghosts, pretending to be people we're not." "Then what do you suggest?" Sari asked. Before Elias could answer, Kai spoke up from his place by the fire. "We could really become them." They all looked at the boy. "The people we're pretending to be," Kai explained with the clarity that sometimes came from young minds. "What if we stopped pretending and just were them?" "You mean give up being Apache entirely?" Naya's voice was carefully neutral. "Not give up, just put it away for a while. Like putting away winter clothes when spring comes." Out of the mouths of babes. Elias found himself wondering if the boy had stumbled onto something profound. "It wouldn't be forever," Mira said slowly. "Just until it's safe to be ourselves again." "And if that day never comes?" Sari asked. "Then we'll have built something good anyway," Naya replied. "A home, a family, a life worth living." The conversation continued late into the night, but Elias could see the direction it was heading. They were talking themselves into becoming the people they'd been pretending to be, not because they wanted to abandon their heritage, but because survival sometimes demanded transformation. Over the following days, the change became more pronounced. They spoke only English even in private. Apache customs gave way to frontier pragmatism. The women wore Martha's dresses not as disguises, but as their own clothes. It wasn't surrender, Elias realized. It was evolution, the same kind of adaptation that allowed species to survive when their environment changed. They were becoming something new, something that could thrive in this hostile world. The transformation culminated 3 weeks later when Naya made an announcement that surprised them all. "I want to learn to read," she said during dinner. "Read?" Elias asked. "English words in books. If I'm going to live in this world, I need to understand it completely." "I can teach you," Mira offered. "I learned some letters from the mission school before everything changed," Naya finished. "Yes, I think we all need to learn new things." That evening, Elias brought out Martha's old books, a Bible, a collection of Shakespeare's plays, and a primer Sarah had used to learn her letters. Watching 3 Apache women bent over the pages by lamplight, sounding out words with careful concentration, he was struck by the profound courage of what they were doing. They weren't just learning to read. They were learning to inhabit a new world, to become citizens of a place that had wanted them dead just months before. "What does this word mean?" Naya asked, pointing to a line in the Shakespeare. Elias looked at the passage. "To be or not to be, that is the question." "It means choosing," he explained. "Choosing whether to keep living or to give up." Naya nodded thoughtfully. "We choose to be." "Yes," he agreed. "We choose to be." As winter deepened toward its end, their strange family found its rhythm. Elias taught the women about ranch management and frontier business. Mira shared her knowledge of herbs and healing, adapting traditional Apache medicine to frontier needs. Sari revealed herself to be gifted with numbers, helping Elias keep better records of their livestock and expenses. And Kai finished his wooden horse. Windrunner was a thing of beauty, carved with the skill of his grandfather's teaching and polished smooth by small, patient hands. The boy presented it to Elias one evening with ceremony. "For keeping us safe," Kai explained. "Windrunner will watch over the ranch when we can't." Elias accepted the gift with hands that trembled slightly. In Apache culture, he knew such gifts carried deep meaning. This wasn't just a toy, it was a symbol of trust, of family, of permanent belonging. That night, he placed the wooden horse on the mantel next to Martha's photograph. Past and present loss and hope standing together in the flickering firelight. Spring was coming. They could all feel it in the warming air, see it in the lengthening days. Soon the snow would melt, revealing a world transformed. And in that world, 5 people who had been strangers would face whatever came next as a family, chosen, forged in necessity, but no less real for all that. The race they'd been running was far from over, but they were no longer running alone. They had each other, and perhaps that would be enough to carry them to safety wherever safety might be found. Safety, as it turned out, had been growing quietly around them all winter long, taking root in shared meals and whispered conversations, in the gentle rhythm of daily chores and the gradual erosion of fear. The first true sign came with the spring thaw, when old Bessie's calf took its first wobbly steps outside the barn, and Kai laughed, not the careful muted sound he'd made for months, but the pure ringing joy of a child who had forgotten for a moment to be afraid. "She's going to be beautiful," Naya said, watching the young heifer explore the muddy yard with cautious curiosity. In the warming sunlight, wearing one of Martha's faded work dresses, she looked every inch the rancher's wife she had slowly become. "What should we name her?" Kai asked, his wooden horse tucked safely in his coat pocket as always. "That's up to Elias," Naya replied. "She's his cow." But Elias shook his head. "She's ours. This whole place is ours now, if you want it to be." The words hung in the air like morning mist, fragile but real. Over the long winter months, something had changed in the way they spoke about the future. The careful qualifiers, "if we stay, until it's safe to leave, when this is over," had gradually disappeared from their conversations, replaced by quiet assumptions about summers to come and crops to plant. Promise, Mira said the single word carrying the weight of months of uncertainty, a good name for a spring calf. So Promise she became, and the name seemed to suit her adventurous spirit and the hope she represented. As April warmed into May, the young cow grew strong and bold, following Kai around the yard like a faithful dog, much to everyone's amusement. The ranch itself seemed to respond to their presence. Elias had worked the land alone for 3 years, keeping it functional but never truly thriving. Now, with 5 sets of hands and hearts invested in its success, the place began to flourish. Mira's herb garden produced medicines that Henrik Larsson traded eagerly for livestock advice. Sari's careful management of their finances allowed them to purchase 2 more breeding cows from a rancher near Tucson. Naya's skill with horses had earned them a reputation for gentling difficult stock, bringing in steady income from neighboring ranches. But it was the small changes that meant the most. Laughter in the evenings instead of watchful silence. Mira humming as she worked, no longer afraid that her voice might carry too far. Sari teaching Kai to throw a knife with deadly accuracy, then showing him how to use the same blade to carve intricate patterns in leather. Naya and Elias working side by side, their partnership deepening into something that neither had expected, but both had come to treasure. The transformation was so gradual, so natural, that Elias almost missed the moment when their assumed identities became reality. It came on a warm evening in late May as they sat on the porch, watching Promise chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "I've been thinking," Naya said quietly, "about what we'd do if the army stopped looking for us, if we were really safe." "What kind of thinking?" Elias asked. "Practical thinking. We'd need to make this arrangement legal somehow. Official papers, marriage certificates, adoption records for Kai." She paused, her dark eyes thoughtful. "Real names to go with our real lives." The suggestion should have shocked him, but it didn't. Somewhere during the long winter, Elias had begun thinking of Naya not as the dangerous Apache woman he was hiding, but as his partner in every way that mattered. She ran the ranch with him, shared his bed on the coldest nights, helped him plan for a future that included all of them. "You'd want that?" he asked. "To make it legal, I'd want us to be safe, all of us. And sometimes safety requires papers and ceremonies and official recognition." Sari looked up from the harness she was mending. "It's a risk. Records mean questions. Questions mean attention." "Not having records is a risk too," Mira pointed out. "What happens if something happens to Elias legally? We don't exist. We'd have no claim to this place, no protection." It was a sobering thought. They had built something beautiful and fragile, but without legal foundation, it could vanish at the first serious challenge. "There's another problem," Kai said, with the directness that still sometimes startled the adults. "I don't want to give up being Apache. Not completely. It's who I am." The boys' words cut to the heart of their dilemma. They could become legal, legitimate citizens, but only by burying their true heritage, so deep it might never resurface. It was survival, but at what cost? "Maybe," Elias said slowly, "we don't have to choose between being safe and being yourselves. Maybe we can find a way to be both." The conversation continued late into the night, but by morning they had reached a decision. They would make their family legal, but they would also find ways to honor and preserve what they were choosing to hide. Mira would continue making traditional medicines, teaching Kai the old knowledge, even as they called it by Spanish names. Sari would maintain her weapon skills and teach them to the others, preserving the warrior spirit that had kept them all alive. And Naya would tell stories carefully disguised as Mexican folktales, but carrying the wisdom of her people forward into their new life. The first step came in June when Elias rode to Tucson with Naya beside him, both dressed in their finest clothes. At the courthouse they filed papers declaring their intention to marry, listing her as Maria Elena Vasquez, widow. From California, seeking a fresh start. The clerk, a bored young man more interested in his lunch than their paperwork, barely glanced at their documents. "Wedding's scheduled for next month," he said, stamping their application with practiced efficiency. "You'll need 2 witnesses and the $5 fee." It was that simple. One conversation, one stamped paper, and Naya began her transformation from fugitive to frontier bride. The wedding itself was a quiet affair held in the small church in town with Henrik Larsson and his wife as witnesses. Mira and Sari wore their best dresses while Kai fidgeted in clothes that Elias had bought him for the occasion. Father Martinez, who had served the predominantly Mexican congregation for 20 years, performed the ceremony in both English and Spanish, blessing their union with warmth and genuine joy. "You may kiss your bride," he said with a smile, and when Elias's lips met Naya's, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The reception was held at the ranch with Henrik's family and a few neighboring ranchers joining them for a feast that Mira had prepared with loving care. As the sun set and the guests departed, Elias found himself alone with his new wife, looking out over land that now legally belonged to both of them. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Naya considered the question seriously. "About marrying you, no. About the life we had to leave behind." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I miss parts of it. The freedom to be completely myself, the connection to something larger than survival, but I don't regret choosing life over pride. Now we build something new, something that honors both of our pasts while creating a future worth living." The next legal hurdle was Kai's adoption, a more complex process that required careful documentation and character witnesses. But Elias's reputation in the community had grown over the years, and the boys' obvious intelligence and good health spoke well of their care. By August, the papers were signed and filed, making Kai legally their son. "Does this mean I have to call you Papa?" Kai asked as they walked home from the courthouse. "You can call me whatever feels right," Elias replied. "Names don't make families, love does." Kai nodded solemnly, then broke into a grin. "Can I call you Papa when other people are around, but keep calling you Elias when it's just us?" "I'd like that very much." Mira and Sari's legal status was handled differently. As unmarried women, they needed employment contracts that would give them legitimate reason to remain on the ranch. Elias hired them officially as housekeeper and livestock manager, respectively, with papers that established their right to live and work on his property. By September, their transformation was complete, at least on paper. They were the Grant family, Elias and Maria, their son Kai, and their employees, Mira and Sarah. To the outside world, they were a success story of frontier determination and family values. But the real test of their new identities came in October, when Lieutenant Morrison returned with a small patrol to investigate reports of Apache activity in the area. This time there had been actual raids. A supply wagon attacked livestock, stolen, 2 travelers killed. The army was taking no chances. Elias opened the door to Morrison's knock with the confidence of a man who had nothing to hide. Behind him, his family continued their evening activities, Mira sewing by the fireplace, Sari helping Kai with his arithmetic, Naya reading aloud from a book of poetry. "Lieutenant Morrison," Elias said warmly. "Good to see you again. Come in, come in. Maria, look who's here." Naya rose from her chair with the graceful courtesy of a well-bred frontier wife. "Lieutenant, what a pleasure. You must stay for coffee." Morrison entered the warm, well-appointed home and looked around with obvious appreciation. The last time he'd been here, the cabin had been sparse and lonely. Now it was clearly the heart of a thriving household. "Mrs. Grant," he said, removing his hat, "you've made quite a difference in this place." "A woman's touch," Naya replied with a smile, "though I had excellent helpers." She gestured to Mira and Sari, who nodded politely. "How are you finding frontier life?" "Challenging but rewarding. Very different from California, but we're building a good life here." Morrison nodded approvingly. "And the boy, how is he adjusting?" "Kai's thriving," Elias said proudly. top of his class in arithmetic, and he's got a real gift with horses. Kai looked up from his schoolwork with the bright, confident expression of a child who knew he was loved and protected. "Hello, Lieutenant Morrison. Are you here about the Apache raids?" "I am, son. We're checking with all the ranchers, making sure everyone's safe." "We haven't seen any Apache," Kai said, matter-of-factly. "But if we did, Papa says we should give them whatever they want and not try to be heroes." Morrison laughed. "Your Papa's a wise man." The conversation continued for another hour, but it was clear that Morrison saw exactly what they wanted him to see, a successful family living the American dream on the frontier. There was no suspicion, no careful questioning, no sense that he was looking for anything more than information about recent raids. "Well, folks," he said finally, "I should be getting back to my patrol. You've got a beautiful home here, Mrs. Grant. You should be proud of what you've built." "We are," Naya replied simply, "very proud." After Morrison left, they sat in stunned silence for several minutes. The encounter that they'd feared for months had passed so easily, it was almost anticlimactic. "Did you see his face?" Mira whispered finally. "He didn't recognize us at all." "We've changed," Sari said thoughtfully. "All of us. Not just our clothes or our names, but something deeper." She was right. The desperate fugitives who had arrived at Elias's door the previous winter were gone, replaced by confident, successful people who belonged in this world they'd claimed as their own. "Is that good or bad?" Kai asked. "It's survival," Naya said firmly. "And survival is always good." As autumn turned to winter, their second winter as a family, they settled into routines that felt as natural as breathing. Elias and Naya planned improvements for the ranch, talking about adding a proper barn and maybe even a windmill for water. Mira established a small business selling her traditional medicines to neighboring ranchers, calling them family remedies from Mexico. Sari's reputation as a crack shot earned her employment training horses for the cavalry ironic but lucrative work that she approached with dry humor. And Kai grew like a weed, his thin frame filling out with good food and hard work, his mind sharp with the education Elias insisted upon. In the evenings, he would practice his letters by writing stories about Windrunner, the magical horse who could outrun any danger. "He's not just running from things anymore," Kai said one night, showing Elias a particularly imaginative tale. "Now he runs toward things, adventures and new places and friends who need help." It was a perfect metaphor for their own transformation. They had stopped running from their past and started running toward their future. The second test of their new lives came in December when a traveling preacher arrived in town with disturbing news. A group calling themselves the Apache Liberation Army had been formed by Eastern sympathizers dedicated to returning stolen Apache children to their tribes. They were reportedly operating throughout the Southwest, investigating families that might be harboring Apache refugees. "They say they can identify Apache blood just by looking at someone," Henrik told Elias over coffee at the town general store. "Some kind of scientific method." Elias felt ice form in his stomach, but kept his expression neutral. "Sounds like nonsense to me." "Maybe so, but they've got the ear of some important people back east. Word is they're planning to investigate every mixed family in the territory." That evening, Elias shared the news with his family. The old fear was back sharp and immediate, but this time it was tempered by something that hadn't existed before, the knowledge that they belonged here, that this was truly their home worth fighting for. "What do we do?" Mira asked. "We do what we've been doing," Naya said firmly. "We live our lives, raise our son, run our ranch. We've built something real here, something legal and documented. No one can take that away from us. And if they try," Sari's hand moved to the knife at her belt, a gesture that had become unconscious over the months, but no less meaningful. "Then they'll learn that frontier women aren't as helpless as they might think." But the threat, when it materialized, came in a form none of them had expected. In January, a well-dressed woman arrived on the afternoon stage, claiming to be a representative of the Apache Liberation Army. Mrs. Elizabeth Hartford was everything they weren't: Eastern educated and absolutely convinced of her moral superiority. She took rooms at the town hotel and immediately began interviewing families with mixed heritage, armed with a notebook full of questions and a mission to rescue Apache children from cultural imprisonment. "She's been asking about Kai," Henrik warned Elias during his next visit to town. "Wants to know about his background, how he came to be with you." "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that you're good people raising a good boy, but she's persistent and she's got some kind of official backing from back east." That night, Elias called a family meeting. They sat around the kitchen table, the same table where they'd shared so many meals, made so many plans, built so many dreams. "She'll want to interview us," he said simply. "All of us." "Let her come," Naya said. "We have nothing to hide, don't we?" Naya met his gaze steadily. "We have legal adoption papers. Kai is our son in every way that matters. No Eastern reformer can change that. But if she suspects, then we convince her she's wrong. We've done it before." Mrs. Hartford arrived 3 days later, driving a rented buggy and carrying herself with the righteousness of someone on a divine mission. Elias met her at the door with the same courtesy he'd shown Lieutenant Morrison, but this time the stakes felt higher. "Mr. Grant, I'm Elizabeth Hartford. I believe you received my letter." "I did. Please come in. My wife has coffee ready." The interview that followed was unlike anything they'd experienced. Mrs. Hartford was intelligent, persistent, and completely convinced that she was saving Kai from a terrible fate. She asked detailed questions about his background, his education, his cultural connections. "Does the boy speak any Apache?" she asked pointedly. "Not a word," Elias replied honestly. "His mother, my wife's cousin, died when he was very young. He was raised speaking Spanish and English. And his father, Mexican, died in a mining accident before Kai was born." Mrs. Hartford made careful notes. "I see. And you, Mrs. Grant, you're of mixed heritage yourself. Half Spanish, half Apache." Naya replied smoothly. "But I was raised in the mission schools. I know very little of the old ways." "That's precisely the problem," Mrs. Hartford said earnestly. "Children of Apache heritage are being denied their birthright, cut off from their people and culture. It's a form of cultural murder." The irony was so sharp it was almost painful. Here was a white woman lecturing them about preserving Apache culture while they sat in disguise, having buried their heritage so deep it might never resurface. "With respect, Mrs. Hartford," Sari said quietly, "Kai is happy here. He's loved, educated, well cared for. Isn't that what matters most?" "Love isn't enough," Mrs. Hartford replied firmly. "A child needs to know who he is, where he comes from. He needs connection to his people." "These are his people," Kai said, suddenly, speaking for the first time since the interview began. "This is my family." Mrs. Hartford turned to study him with sharp eyes. "You're very articulate for a frontier child. Tell me, what do you know about Apache customs, Apache stories?" Kai glanced at Naya, and Elias held his breath. This was the moment of greatest danger a young boy faced with questions that could destroy everything they'd built. "I know some stories," Kai said carefully. "Mexican stories my mama tells me, about coyote and rabbit and the spirits that live in the desert." It was brilliant. Apache stories told as Mexican folklore, their heritage preserved but disguised, just as they had planned. "Interesting," Mrs. Hartford murmured, making more notes. "And you're happy here. You don't feel displaced, rootless." Kai looked around the warm kitchen at the faces of the people who had saved him, sheltered him, loved him into wholeness. "No, ma'am. I feel like I'm exactly where I belong." Mrs. Hartford spent 2 more hours with them, but gradually her questions became less pointed, her manner less accusatory. By the time she left, Elias sensed that they had passed another test, convinced another skeptic that they were exactly what they claimed to be. "That boy is clearly well-adjusted and loved," she told Henrik before leaving town. "Sometimes the Apache Liberation Army receives false reports. This is obviously one of those cases." Word of Mrs. Hartford's conclusion spread quickly through the community, and with it came a sense of final acceptance. They had been investigated by the army, scrutinized by reformers, and examined by their neighbors. Each time they had been found to be exactly what they claimed, a successful frontier family living the American dream. As spring returned for the second time since their arrival, bringing new calves and fresh hope, Elias found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this place. They had traveled from desperation to security, from fear to love, from mere survival to genuine prosperity. "Do you ever wonder," he asked Naya one evening as they watched Kai and Promise play in the yard, "what would have happened if I'd walked away that morning, if I'd left you to find Kai on your own?" Naya considered the question seriously. "I think we all would have died, separately, alone, and too soon. And instead," she smiled, the expression transforming her face with warmth and contentment, "instead we learned something important." "What's that?" "That family isn't about blood or birthright or keeping traditions alive exactly as they were. Family is about choosing to stay, choosing to love, choosing to build something together that's stronger than what any of us could create alone." That night, as Elias lay beside his wife, listening to the sounds of his household settling into sleep, he reflected on the truth of her words. They had lost much in their journey to this place: languages, customs, connections to ancestral lands, and traditional ways of life. But they had gained something too, each other, and the knowledge that love could transform even the most desperate circumstances into something beautiful. Kai still carried his wooden horse Windrunner, now polished smooth by constant handling, but the boy no longer clutched it like a talisman against fear. Instead, he carried it like a reminder of possibility, of the magic that happened when courage met kindness and created something entirely new. In the distance, a coyote howled at the moon, its voice carrying across the desert like an echo from another world. But here, in this cabin filled with warmth and laughter and the gentle breathing of sleeping family, that other world felt very far away indeed. They had run far enough. They had found their place to rest their people, to love their reason to stay. The race was over, and they had won something more precious than mere survival. They had won home.